Are 14 minions enough? Well, for good measure, let's summon some more. No clue how high these stacks will get because the boss is just going to die. This is Minion Madness, and it can be played with numerous variants regarding ailments. If you like poison, necrotic, physical, fire, cold, they'll all work, and the build can be tweaked to your preference. We're going to cover the foundation of the build, so that you can apply the concepts to whichever version you prefer. First, to answer a question that's bound to be asked. Yes, you can level with this build. In fact, it's one of the best leveling builds in the game. It'll shred bosses from start to finish, quickly move through the campaign, and requires no specific gear to make the build function. Unlike some other ARPGs that you may have played, you do not need a corpse in order to summon your minions. This is fantastic, so you can pick up the game at any point and simply just start summoning your army. If you're familiar with the game, you may notice that the mana pool for this particular character is a little bit on the lower side, but that's perfectly fine. The reason for this is we'll be taking Rip Blood, and Rip Blood has the ability to return health and mana whenever it's cast and hits an enemy, and it'll bring orbs back to you that replenish both of these resources. Early on in the game, that isn't needed. You can simply deplete your mana pool and simply walk around while it recharges, and you'll have enough mana to sustain and watch all the enemies die. In fact, you can continue to do this at higher level, it's just more efficient to replenish it. The Golem is our largest summon, and it's essentially the tank of the group. It does a fair amount of AoE damage, has really good survivability, and you see alone, it's enough to actually take down these enemies. In fact, you don't even need any of the other summons. However, if we want to hasten the process, we can certainly bring up more minions. One of my favorite is actually the Wraiths. These are often neglected in a lot of summoning builds. You can pump out the Wraiths really quickly, see that enemy's health went down rather fast. The trade-off for the Wraiths is that their health will deplete automatically, and eventually those essentially just die. However, when we have additional Wraiths out, we can benefit from passive talents like Empty the Graves. This is going to increase our health regeneration per minion, and the additional armor that we get just adding to the survivability of our character. For the leveling process, you'll actually unlock Summon Wraith as soon as you select Necromancer for your mastery. However, I would suggest not taking it as a specialization until the 4th one in the order of progression for your character. The default Wraith is plenty while you're leveling up, and you can just use this as you have the mana to do so. Remember, Rip Blood is going to return health and mana, and we've prevented that having a cost by taking the Splatter node over here as opposed to the Eviscerate node here. You can certainly summon your entire army if you like, or if it's strong enough at whatever point in the game that you're at, you can summon it as you go. The other thing to keep in mind is we're actually going to be using Summon Skeletal Mage and using that as our traversal skill. What I mean by that is there's a specialization node that you can take that turns this into a teleport and actually brings several of your minions with you. Eventually you'll be able to bring 9 minions with you and essentially stomp onto the enemy, bring all of that damage and survivability with you wherever you go. Whenever you use this, it'll actually teleport you, which is unlike some of the other traversal skills in the game that have the ability to specialize talents and convert them into a traversal skill. Stormcrows for the Primalist comes to mind as an example where you actually need to have both of the minions alive in order to use the teleport that it can gain. With this spell, even if you don't have the maximum number of mages, when you teleport, it'll just give you an additional one. So you always have this at your disposal. These are the two nodes that I'm talking about in regards to the talent tree here. Grave Passage is going to transform that into the traversal skill, and Death's Cavalry is going to allow the minions to come with you. At max rank, you can bring 9 minions with you when you teleport. Just absolutely massive way to change what's going on in the battlefield. You can use this to prioritize targets as you see fit, as you can stomp onto them and immediately bring the majority of your minions with you wherever you go. Great feature of the Wraiths is that you can actually summon them wherever you want. You can point on the screen wherever you want once you've got that unlocked, and actually use them as essentially fodder or a means of tanking the enemies. That's the main reason for having them in the build. They do benefit from all the other things that minions will gain through our passive trees and skill points. However, simply being able to walk around, whether it be on a map or in the campaign, and summon these to just soak up damage is incredibly handy, and it really adds to the survival of your character. And you can see just the sheer number of minions, how many dots they can put up so quickly with this build. None of the gear that's actually equipped on this character is mandatory at all. You can start this build at level 1 as mentioned in the intro. However, I do want to point out one thing. If you can find any equipment that has a property like this, 27% chance to bleed on minion hit, it's incredibly strong for this build. Now this doesn't need to be bleed, it could be any ailment, and the fact is that you have so many minions that any percent chance is going to add up rather quickly and keep those dots or ailments applied. And that's going to add up to be a lot of damage over the course of a boss fight. Now whether you like fully passive builds or builds that involve your actual actions a little bit more, that's totally up to you. What I do want to mention is that this build can basically be played as either. You could swap out Wraiths for something else if you don't want to be hitting the buttons that often, and run around as I am dodging abilities from the enemies and letting your minions do the work. Or if you want to be more active, you can use the teleport as shown to quickly traverse from area to area, use your Wraiths to essentially soak up some damage, deal some additional damage at the same time, and move quicker and have a much more active playstyle. The choice is totally up to you, just like whichever element you want to choose is as well. When you're working through maps or even just running the campaign for speed, you won't use Rip Blood a tremendous amount. That's primarily used on high health enemies or even bosses. However, it's really good when defending objectives as well. You can essentially use your mana to get the Wraiths or just replenish your army as needed, and then you can start spamming the Rip Blood while avoiding any incoming damage. This will allow you to keep your mana topped off and essentially be able to use whichever skills you need in order to replenish minions as needed. In this video, we're running a Cold Golem, Cold Skeleton Archers, and Cold Skeleton Mages. However, again, you can run these as whichever ailments you prefer. As for the Golem itself, it can buff the armor of nearby minions, incredibly useful for helping them survive. It can also increase the movement speed. This is very nice. You can summon Wraiths at the enemy, have the minions from behind catch up, and then start nuking them from range. Using all the skills together is quite easy. You're going to traverse through the map for increased mobility by using your Skeletal Mage as a teleport, summon the Wraiths where needed, essentially to distract the enemies while your ranged minions catch up, and then explode everything in its way, and just continue to do so. Your mana is going to be very sustainable while you're doing this because your minions really aren't going to go down that often. When you get higher health or even more difficult mobs, and we'll use one of the exiled mages as an example, you'll essentially want to make sure that you're positioning yourself in safe spots. As you do this, you can then work in the Wraiths in order to get more damage on the enemy, but your minions are just going to melt everything in sight. The passive trees, which I always find easier to just view on a build guide, will be available in the link through the video description. I will update this as the Warlock is released in case we want to rearrange any of these points for the maximum efficiency with this build. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.